Hi, my name is Alan Charles, and today I'll be talking about my new book, Walking Out the Other Side, An Addict's Journey from Loneliness to Life.
Hi everyone, welcome again to AuthorStory. I'm Alexander Lim, your host, and this week I'm interviewing Alan S. Charles, who's had an amazing life journey and who's the author of the book Walking Out the Other Side, An Addict's Journey from Loneliness to Life. So Alan, welcome to AuthorStory. It's really wonderful to have you as our guest.
Hi, Alex. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for having me.
Cool, great. So Alan, please introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your story.
Okay, so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about my book. The book is a memoir, and as you said, the name of the book is Walking Out the Other Side, An Addict's Journey from Loneliness to Life.
All right.
And the book is about my 24-year addiction with cocaine,
Hmm.
and then subsequently talks about my recovery and some of the ups and successes that I've had in my life, which have been quite a few, and then unfortunately some of the downs that were pretty low.
Right. Okay. So, before anything else, what inspired you to write this book? What made you decide, I gotta write this. I got this. Get this memoir out. I gotta write this one. Have it published.
I had been four 4 years sober, and I had made a decision. I guess for quite some time, I had been thinking about writing a book. I wasn't sure specifically what the book was going to be about. I knew obviously it was going to contain things about my addiction and my recovery, but from the time I was about 30 years old, I had some interesting and different life experiences that had happened to me, and had a very good friend that I went to college with,
Hmm.
who I was continued to be in contact with. We would talk on a monthly basis, and every time I would have another story for him, and he would kind of joke and say, "There's another chapter for your book,"
Okay.
and that's kind of how my life has been. It's kind of played out that way. And once I had gotten sober and felt that I was in a good place, I had this desire to share my story and give back and see if I can help people, either families that are going through what I've been through, on both sides of it, or to help people that were struggling with addiction, to see that there was some light at the end of the tunnel, because I and everybody around me that had seen my addiction did not think I was going to survive. So,
Hmm.
kind of the theme has always been, if Alan was able to get sober, anybody can get sober.
Right. Okay. Cool. That's very inspiring right there. So, Alan, you've been through. You had one hell of a childhood, and I mean, it was tough from what I understand because there's nothing by the way of love in the household you grew up in, and feel free to correct me wrong in my assumption. But
Okay.
for the sake of our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Well, to start out, I had a basic childhood, a mother and a father and a younger brother.
Right.
And my world changed when I was 9 years old. My father died, and just kind of uh, giving some information. I guess, what do they call those? A spoiler alert.
Okay.
Do
All right.
listen if you want to read the book, but I was told my father died of a heart attack when I was 9, and when my mom passed when I was 36,
Right.
I found out my father committed suicide. So
Okay.
there's a lot of underlying things that I share in the book about all of that. But getting back to your point, when my father passed, my mother was not a strong person. So she
Mm.
kind of checked out emotionally. She was left with me being 9. My brother was 7. We didn't have much money. The
Right.
household quickly became dysfunctional. My mother emotionally abandoned me. My brother developed a mental illness,
Mm.
and there became a lot of violence and anger. And I guess the best way to describe it is I ended up living in a war zone
Right.
the remainder of time I spent in my house before I finally left for college.
Right. But I gotta hand it to you. I mean, you did eventually go to college, and you eventually played baseball professionally, and you got into horse racing. So that's an achievement. I'd say that's an achievement coming from the kind of childhood you had.
I thank you for saying that first off. I There was a lot of struggle, but somehow internally I had this drive that I was going to get through anything, and I do share about that in the book. That I had this knot in my stomach after my father passed, and I would walk to school every single day thinking about I'm alone on this planet, I'm by
Mm.
myself, how am I going to handle this? And then I kind of came up with my own mantra that I would say out loud walking to school every day, that no matter what the situation, I am going to be able to get out of any situation. I can get through anything. And that kind of, I guess, was the beginning of serving me this inner feeling that I can do whatever I want to do or accomplish.
Right.
And fortunately, I had some really big successes, as you shared. I played professional baseball, and and still am. I do it now as a hobby. I'm a professional harness racing driver. So
Mm.
I've had a lot of interesting and very cool life experiences, and that I'm very grateful for.
Right. Cool. And those are achievements right there. Now, from what I understand, I mean, you experimented with stuff like steroids and speed when you were like back in college or when you were doing baseball. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you for reading the book so closely. Growing up and being in sports, I had a disdain for people that did drugs. I
Mm.
mean, it wasn't just a thought. I would talk to friends when I was in high school, and we would see these other kids that I grew up with that, at least to our eyes, was obvious that they were smoking pot or, that there were these quote unquote druggies, that they weren't doing anything with their life and they were just kind of hanging out, and
Right.
you can see in their eyes that they just were not present. And I was like, how can anybody do that to themselves? That's disgusting.
Mm.
And so when I was in college, and still having that mindset because I was there to play baseball and to go to school, I had some situations with trying these black beauties, kind of these uppers and then after I had an arm injury and an operation, somebody had suggested steroids, and I had a 2 month kind of trial trying to gain some arm strength back using steroids.
Right.
But to me, these were just performance enhancing stuff that I was trying to help my baseball career. It did not I was not using drugs as an emotional checking out or to mask my feelings or to do other things. So, those two specific things and incidents that I share about in the book were specifically to enhance my baseball and have nothing to do with doing drugs. At
Right.
least that's how I looked at it. And then eventually, the first time that I tried cocaine, it was in a very dark period of a lot of things going on in my life.
Mm.
And I was addicted from the very first line. It lifted that knot in my stomach that I had had when I was 9 years old. I tried cocaine the first time when I was 24. So, struggling all those years, that first line, that knot lifted and disappeared. And I'm like, oh my God, where has this drug been my entire life?
Mm. Okay. So I was kind of wondering about that because I mean, it's common nowadays that you think you start with a soft drug or like marijuana or speeds and stuff like that, and then progress to coke. But from what I understand, it seems that once you start on coke, you didn't do anything. You were more or less clean before that. Once you start doing coke, it was like that was it. I mean, you were on the road.
That definitely opened the floodgate. I'll qualify this by saying I'm not a doctor, but I have spent quite a bit of time studying and reading and gone through this addiction, and I've been to 4 inpatient rehabs and 15 odd outpatient programs. And so I have a pretty good working knowledge of addiction and recovery and what drugs do. And, they talk about marijuana, or, who people might think, oh, that's really nothing. And they're
Yeah.
starting to legalize it. But, everything that I've read, it's a gateway to doing other things. It lowers your inhibitions and your tolerance. And there's actually studies that show no matter what drug it is, that it, even from the first use, it's changing your brain chemistry, which lowers your inhibitions, which will lead you to doing more drugs.
Right. Okay. All right. I got that. Right. So, what is, a lot of us, a lot of our listeners, we're not, we haven't taken drugs. A lot of us are sober. We haven't tried that thing, and maybe the worst we've taken is a stiff drink or something like that. What's it like to be, well, I don't know, for lack of a better word, high? Is it like really floating, like the stuff you see in like those hippie movies, or is it like something else?
Well, I haven't done like heroin and LSD and other drugs that you would, I guess people would say they trip on and have that euphoric feeling. But then again, with that said, cocaine produces these endorphins, and you do get this high.
Mm.
And I've been up using cocaine there have been periods where I've been up for 7 straight days using drugs. And
Wow. Okay.
the whole feeling of euphoria and the rush that it gives you, it is an incredible feeling. It draws you in, and as it changes the brain chemistry. You have a physical and psychological addiction to the
Mm.
drug, where when you start to come down from using it, you're actually feeling despair, and
Mm.
you're hurting, and being without it, all you do is crave the drug to get back to that state where you were when you were using it. And
Mm.
being a drug addict, what the addiction does, or at least it did for me, and I hear the same thing for others, is you basically lose all choice and any decision to make a rational decision to say, I'm not going to do this drug. I need to stop. It's going to hurt me. What ends up happening is it's a progressive disease,
Right.
and as it changes the brain chemistry, you lose your option to make choices, and to make a rational decision not to use, and you will eventually start to choose your use of your drug over anything else. And in my case, it was over jobs and money and
Mm.
children and wives and relationships. Cocaine became the center of my life.
Right. Okay, well, thanks for telling that, because I mean, I'm sure there are quite a few of our listeners who are thinking, all these drug addicts, they can quit anytime if they really wanted to. But what you point out is very interesting, because there is, a psychological, a physiological change when cocaine is taken in, and
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know how old you are, but going back to President Reagan and his wife Nancy, she started a program, or an anti-drug program, Just Say No. And that
mm,
might work if you've never done drugs before.
right,
But like you alluded to, there's probably plenty of people that don't understand, and rightly
yes,
so, if they don't have any experience. It's like, how could you just not look at all the bad things that happen? How do you
exactly,
not just say no? That it's just common sense. Why would you go do it? Don't do it.
mm,
And that, unfortunately, if it was that easy, there would be a lot less drug addicts out there, unfortunately.
right. Okay, well, thanks for that. I mean, it's certainly a window for a lot of us and our listeners who don't do drugs or haven't even tried. So thanks for that information.
You're welcome.
All right. So in looking back on your experience, was there? I mean, we've talked about the physiological, talked about psychological. What was it that um, made you realize, just how deep a hole you were in, where your addiction was concerned?
I realized it after, I would say, I was married twice, and I was in a very short marriage in my middle 30s, and I was addicted to cocaine at that time.
Right?
And looking at the relationship, every relationship that I had over the 24 years of my addiction, I chose cocaine over any personal relationship. So
Mm.
that was my focus. So this was a very short relationship. Looking back on it, I don't know how that person married me, because I was so addicted to the drug at the time, and it dictated my life. And it put me in a place where, as I shared before, I couldn't make any rational decisions.
Mm.
My go-to was to go use cocaine and to disappear. So with that, it made it very difficult to live life without the drug. But at that point, I realized, answering your question, I realized what a difficult place I was in, and that I had a problem. And even though I was rationalizing and saying I don't have a problem, at that point I knew deep down that this drug had taken over my life, and I really didn't have much choice.
Right.
And the only thing that continued to happen is that, this being a progressive disease, the consequences got worse and worse. So I losing relationships, then I started losing jobs, then I was going through all my money, then I had another relationship, then I lost that, and I had children with this second relationship. Then it became a point where I wasn't able to see my children because of the cocaine. And then I tested positive in court, and then I was fired from my job. Then there was divorce papers, and there was an order not to be able to contact a restraining order. So my life was falling further and further down and spiraling out of control, that I basically lost everything and ended up homeless
Mm.
because of this addiction.
All right, and that's an interesting point that you just made, that I just heard, because it occurs to me that you realize that this isn't working, but it still took you years before you finally decided, this is it, bottom line, I'm not taking this stuff anymore.
Well, there was a lot involved, and as I shared earlier, I was in and out of rehabs, and I was given all the information of, I have a disease. It's physiological, it's psychological, it's a spiritual disease. I have this hole inside,
Right?
and my brain chemistry has changed, and look at all the consequences. But until I was finally able, it piled up, and I guess losing my children, testing positive in court, where the judge said I couldn't see my kids for 6 months until I was able to produce weekly clean tests for 6 straight months,
Mm.
that I hit a bottom and realized just how bad my life had gotten.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that experience. It definitely gives insight into how this addiction can really progress. So, Alan, you've been sober for what, 8, 9 years now, correct?
December 8th, I celebrated 8 years of sobriety. So
Wow,
thank you. We're
fantastic,
just a
right
little
there.
over 8 years.
Fantastic, right there. Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Now, from what I understand, since I do know someone who was once an addict, there's no like a happy ending like those presented movies where people live happily ever after. From what I stand, staying sober, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, staying sober requires something of an effort. So, what is it that has enabled you to stay sober for all this time, and hopefully, for the next several years until the day you die?
You know what? What a lot of people, some people know this, and people in the recovery field, and I guess quite a few people understand that addiction is a disease.
Mm.
So with it being a disease, I've always heard this analogy that it's like okay, if you have cancer, you're going to take the medication and you're going to take the chemo and you're going to do all the things that you do to treat this.
Right.
Well, addiction is no different. With this disease, whatever I'm doing to stay sober, which I will share with you, I'm going to need to continue to take this quote unquote medicine so I can live a productive and happy and healthy life. If somebody was to if somebody at least coming to me and said, listen, you can get sober, here's what you need to do to live a life of recovery, but it's going to be painful and there is no happy ending and you're not going to be able to have joy and live happily, I would say, you know what? I'll just choose to continue to do cocaine, because who wants to live unhappy and have a horrible life?
Yeah.
But there is a happy life. I am in the best place that I've ever been in my entire life.
Cool.
And what I did to get here was to work a program of recovery. So I go to AA or CA, so that's Alcoholics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous.
Right.
So I go to meetings and I work a program of recovery. So for people that don't know what that is, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous is based around it's a spiritual program. It's about these 12 steps. So what these 12 steps have done for me is it actually explains how to live life, how to be a good person, how to do the next right thing, how to make amends for some of the things we've done in life. And it kind of takes you step by step into becoming a whole person. And I shared with you the little bit we talked about my background.
Yep.
Unfortunately, some of this upbringing that many people get from having parents that are present, these pieces are put into people's lives and they don't have to go learn it later on as an adult, because they were brought up in a proper way and they understand these are the things to do and how you live and how you deal with life.
Right.
Unfortunately for me and maybe other addicts, they don't get these tools. So I didn't learn how to live until I came into the recovery program, and these practices and principles I work on a daily basis, and it helps me to maintain and to be able to give back. And by working and by doing this radio interview and by writing this book, if I can help other people, that allows me to live in a way where I can walk with my head up, instead of how I always lived in a life where I couldn't look people in the eye. Right. Because I had this addiction and I was hiding all these things. So it's completely changed my life around. Right. And it was important to me to be able to write this book and to show my true self, which I was never able to do before.
Right. Fantastic. Fantastic. Cool. Got that. Okay, so Alan, let's say you met up with someone who's either starting out on, taking drugs on a road similar to the one you took, but, someone who's still willing to listen. What is it that you would tell him or her about, how to change to a less destructive path?
Well, from my understanding and knowing what I went through, it's very hard to preach to somebody, especially if they're, as you explained in the beginning parts, or of an active addiction. They have to understand this is kind of a self-diagnosed disease. Only you know if you have a problem.
All right.
You can get the information and you can hear it, and I could possibly plant seeds in somebody that's going down a bad path, and they might see I could suggest to them and tell them, are these specific things happening to you? And there's a whole laundry list of things that if you answer yes to these questions, it might mean that you have an addiction or you're heading down a deep path. Right. And if they're willing to see that, that's great, and they can make adjustments in their life. But some people have to get consequences first before they're willing to make changes.
Okay.
And it doesn't happen. Everybody's different. There are some people, I've known people that they've used cocaine or smoked pot as on a recreational basis. They do it once in a while. They have a drink or two, and they're able to stop and not pick up another drink, and they don't obsess about when they can have another drink or when they can do another line. And they live normal lives, and that's wonderful. I wish that, that would have been me, and that I could be a recreational user. And when I needed to, get a little buzz or to check out or maybe have a problem, and I'm going to go have a drink and not think about it. It'll ease the tension. That's a wonderful way to live. But some people just can't live that way.
Okay. All right. So what seems to be coming out here is that this is also like, as you mentioned, it's really dependent on the individual. No two people are alike when it comes to addiction. Then.
Absolutely, and that's why we know, I know at least personally, that this program of recovery works for me, because I was trying every way and every justification to how to use less and how for it not to become a problem in my life. And I've seen a lot of people go in and out of the recovery program.
Right.
And I know, at least from what I've seen, that is one way to put this disease in submission, is to work a program of recovery. To stop cold turkey, I don't know. I guess it works for some people, but I don't know many people that have been able to get off of drugs or to stop an addiction just by going cold turkey.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I got that. Okay. So, Alan, authors who write nonfiction books, they sometimes go on a journey as they do so. Has working on this book done that for you?
Well, it was a difficult journey because it forced me to go back into my childhood. There were a lot of fun parts, talking about playing baseball in college and my, the successes of making it to college and graduating and then becoming a professional baseball player, and then my horse racing career. Some of those things, to look back at those adventures, were very joyful, and those experiences, and I have a lot of gratitude and feel good about my successes. But then there were the pieces that I had to go back and look at my addiction and my life and the dysfunction of the household that I grew up in, and all the relationships that I lost and the people that I hurt and what I did to myself over the 24 years of addiction. Those were very dark times, and it took me 3 years to write this book. And I can share with you that there were months on months that sitting and writing and going through the notes that I had made on what I've done in life situations were absolutely horrible, to have to sit in my skin and relive a lot of this.
Right, and yet you still completed the book. That's something, definitely something right there.
Well, I guess that's kind of walking out the other side, thus the name of the title. That's kind of been my life message. And I think that it's the message of my book, is that anything, not just of addiction, but, I think this is a good point that, my book is not just for somebody that has an addiction or a family member or people that know about addiction.
Right.
I grew up living with fear and anxiety and all of these underlying conditions, and that the feeling that, or at least this is what I learned, that if you showed people who you really are, they really wouldn't like me, and to not say things to people because, I might say the wrong things and then they wouldn't like me. So,
Right.
so I grew up very scared, and my whole story is about becoming the real person that I was meant to be, and that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and to have this persistence and willingness and faith, and that never give up, because the next miracle might be right around the corner. And that's something that I have believed inside to the core, that, just reading some of the reviews of the book, unfortunately, they've been very complimentary. I've, it's kind of a comeback story and a feel good story, that no matter how low you can get, that there could be this happy ending.
All right. Okay, got it. Those are powerful words right there, and thank you for sharing them. So, Alan, is there anything else, other stories or topics that you may want to explore as an author in the future? I mean, you did mention that, you did come up with quite a few thoughts for different kind of books earlier on at the start of this interview.
You know what? My life, I guess at this point, I feel a calling to be able to give back and to help. I've done some speaking at colleges and schools and in hospitals, and I am working towards doing some motivational speaking, based around using my book as a tool, and leveraging it to be able to give back and to help people that are struggling and have gone, through a lot of the things that I have gone through. And I'm hoping to help preteens and teens, and I have some speaking engagements coming up around that,
Right.
where I'm looking to help people so that they don't have to go down a path that
Right.
I've gone to. And then potentially down the road, I believe I have a few other books in me. For the first time, I have this healthy relationship, a love relationship with this woman that, I believe is the love of my life. So, I've gone from where I've lost everything and never had a healthy relationship to my life being completely different, because I found this recovery. And at some point, maybe there'll be a book on sharing about that.
Cool, fantastic. So, Alan, in the closing minutes of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share to inspire our listeners?
I don't know if there's anything different other than what I shared about, which I think is a message about life,
Right.
and that is persistence and never give up, because it's all about, we all have this fire inside of us, and you are the ultimate one that has to live your life. So you should never, never, never give up. That no matter how bad things are, how depressed you feel, that somehow you have to keep clawing and grabbing and striving. And I believe that is some part God-given, but I think another part, you need to believe and to get in touch with that. And I think that's the basis of any success, is persistence and never give up. And that's what this book is all about.
Right. Okay, cool. I got that. Okay, so in closing, the book is Walking Out the Other Side, An Addict's Journey from Loneliness to Life. The author is our guest, Alan S. Charles, and you can find the book at his website, walkingouttheotherside.com. It is also available on online retailers like Amazon, Barnes& Noble, both in ebook and audiobook versions. So, Alan, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being an author story. I know it is probably kind of intense, but it's also very informative for me and for our listeners as well.
Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today.
You're welcome. And there are lots more inspiring author stories to tell. If you'd like to keep up with us on books and interviews, I invite you to subscribe to AuthorStory. And we'll be back next time on Author Story with another inspiring author.